There's a lot of confusion out there about firewood BTU, and maybe for good reason. There are a lot of firewood BTU charts on the internet with conflicting data. It has a lot of people all twisted up, turned around. They don't even know which way is up anymore when it comes to firewood BTU, which might be a slight exaggeration, or a big one. Today we're going to simplify it so you'll be able to tell how much heat energy you can get out of one species compared to another species without even using one of those cockamamie firewood BTU charts, even though some of them are actually really good. And we'll bust the common myth that hardwoods are higher in BTU than softwoods. It's actually the other way around. Softwoods are typically higher in BTU than hardwoods. That may sound like crazy talk or clickbait, but a lot of things sound like crazy talk or clickbait until you understand them. Real quick, before we get into that, what is a BTU? And how would we be able to recognize one if we saw one? BTU stands for British Thermal Unit. It's a unit for measuring heat energy. They call it a British thermal unit because it's based on the amount of body heat created by an average British person. 1 BTU is the amount of body heat an average British person will create over 1 minute, exactly 1 hour after drinking tea. What? You look like you don't believe me. I think you may have some trust issues. You might want to look into that. Coincidentally, it also just happens to be the amount of energy it takes to increase the temperature of a pound of water by 1 degree Fahrenheit. What? You believe that, but you didn't believe the other thing? Okay, I may have made some of the other thing up a little bit, but doesn't this seem a little sus too? If it's a British thermal unit, why would they be using pounds and Fahrenheit instead of the metric system? Never mind that BTUs came out long before the metric system was adopted in Britain. I still think it seems a little sus. But I don't think it matters anyway. I think still, most of us would not recognize a BTU if it walked right past us. I think what we really want to know is what types of firewood are going to give us more heat than others. That mostly just comes down to density. The more dense a wood is, the higher the BTU, the more heat energy that wood has to give. If wood is more dense, that means there is more wood in that wood. If wood is less dense, that means there is less wood in this less dense piece of wood, like this cedar, because it has more airspace, which means less wood. If there's more wood in wood to burn, that means there's more energy, more heat in that wood. Did that make sense? It did to me. I think that's what matters. If we take two similar sized pieces of wood, piece of black oak here, piece of big leaf maple, second softest maple there is, I can tell this oak is a little bit more heavy than this maple. That means this oak has higher BTU, more heat energy than this maple. If I compare the maple to a piece of incense cedar that's actually longer and a little bit bigger than the maple is still considerably heavier than the cedar is. The maple is higher in BTU by the amount of difference, I think you know what I mean. If I compare that incense cedar to this piece of oak, which the oak is actually even smaller, but I can still tell there's a bigger difference between the cedar and the oak than there was between the cedar and the maple. If we compare the weight, or more accurately the density, cedar is less dense, lower BTU. Maple, much more dense, higher BTU. Oak, heavier than the maple, so it has even higher BTU. It's not just about weight, it's about density, which factors in size. They all have to be the same size for this to be a fair fight. If I take this piece of madrone, this piece of black oak, similar size, I can't tell a difference in weight. If you have two species of the same size and you can't tell which one's heavier, I think that's a good indication you shouldn't lose a whole lot of sleep worrying about which one has higher BTU. I think a lot of people tend to optimize for the wrong things in life. We're dealing with firewood here. We're not landing rovers on Mars to split hairs over which one has a higher BTU when they're close to the same. What's the point of that? It mostly comes down to density. The more dense a wood is, the more wood you're going to have inside the wood. The more wood you have inside the wood, the more wood there is in the wood to burn. The more wood there is inside the wood to burn, the more heat you're going to get out of the wood. Try saying that 25 times fast. I'm not sure if I mentioned yet, this only works with dry wood. If you're trying to compare a piece of dry wood to a piece of green wood, or if any time the wood has a lot of moisture in it, give it up, Poindexter. It ain't gonna work. This only works with dry wood. But what if you want to know the BTU difference between certain types of wood, but you don't happen to have those types of wood on hand to compare the difference? Or you just don't want to stand around looking like you're procrastinating, learning how to juggle. If you don't want to look it up on the firewood BTU charts for whatever aluminum foil hat wearing reason you might have, you can just look up the density of whatever wood you're interested in. If you look up how much does a cubic foot of alder weigh, then look up how much does a cubic foot of California black oak weigh, then how much does a cubic foot of Oregon white oak weigh. If you compare those numbers, it will give you, for all practical purposes, the difference between those numbers will be the general amount of heat difference between those different types of wood. Why would you want to go through any of this instead of just looking it up on the firewood BTU charts? I don't know. I'm not the one wearing the aluminum foil hat. But once you know the density, you can figure softwood has about 9,000 BTU per pound, whereas hardwood has about 8,600 BTU per pound. According to this U.S. Forest Service document I will link to in the description, if I remember. Isn't that odd? Softwood has more BTU per pound than hardwood. Why is that? Even though it may sound like crazy talk, that's because softwood has resins in it, the stuff we call pitch. Resins have higher BTU than wood fiber. Hardwoods don't have those resins in them. But a lot of hardwoods are much more dense than softwoods. Even though softwood may have more BTU per pound, these dense hardwoods will have much higher BTU per volume. A cubic foot of dense hardwood will have much higher BTU than a cubic foot of softwood. So don't let some slick firewood salesman try to use that to tell you, you're going to get more heat out of softwood than you're going to get out of hardwood. Firewood is not sold by weight, it's sold by volume. By volume, hardwood is going to give you more energy. Dense hardwood, that is. Not all hardwood is dense, like this alder. This alder is less dense than some softwood. But that's another story for another time. Another common myth when it comes to wood and BTU is with wood pellets. When some people buy wood pellets, they'll buy hardwood pellets thinking the hardwood's going to have higher BTU, more heat than softwood pellets. Actually, it's the opposite. When they compress wood into pellets, regardless of whether it's hardwood or softwood, it gets compressed into close to the same density. In pellet form, hardwood loses its density advantage, but softwood keeps its resin advantage. When you compress the two into a similar density, the softwood has those resins which have more BTU than just wood alone. Softwood pellets have higher BTU than hardwood pellets. Hardwood pellets also produce more ash. The reason to buy hardwood pellets is for cooking and grilling to get the hardwood smoke flavor. If you want pellets for heating, softwood's going to give you the advantage. More BTU, less ash. Back to the subject of firewood, comparing the weight to compare BTU, even that is not 100% accurate. But firewood BTU is not accurate, partly because of, well, we'll get into that in a minute. If you take this piece of white oak and this piece of madrone, let's pretend they have the same density. This madrone is going to have higher BTU than this oak, pretending they have the same density. Oak produce, especially white oak, especially Oregon white oak, produces a lot of ash. Madrone produces very little ash. The weight of the weight of the minerals in this wood, that's what produces the ash, is minerals, is going to take away from its BTU because those minerals don't burn. This has more burnable wood because it has fewer of those minerals. If you have a type of wood that produces more ash than another, you're going to have to subtract that from the BTU. On the BTU charts, Oregon white oak is rated higher than madrone. I'm skeptical of that. Maybe it actually is higher in BTU, but where do you think they get the figures they are putting on those firewood BTU charts? Are they coming from some scientist wearing a white lab coat who has each species of wood, burning each one, carefully measuring the amount of heat coming off of each one, then comparing that to the heat coming out of the room next door that's full of British people? I don't think so. I think they're just taking the density of the wood, making the calculations based on that. But when they do that, are they factoring in the amount of ash in each type of wood? Maybe, maybe not. One variable for BTU is bark. A lot of times bark will have a different density and BTU value than the wood. If you get a load of firewood that has a lot of bark in it, especially if it's thick bark, that sample of wood is going to have a different BTU value than a load of wood with less bark or no bark. And there can be BTU variation even within the same species. If you have wood that was fast growing that has widely spaced growth rings, that wood can be less dense, have lower BTU than slow growing wood with tight grain. This piece that came from a Douglas fir branch has very tight rings. This is going to be more dense and have higher BTU than a piece of fast growing Douglas fir. Even within the same piece of wood, you can have areas that have wider grains, they're less dense with less BTU, areas in the same piece that have tighter grain that are more dense with higher BTU. Knots are generally more dense than the rest of the wood. If a piece has knots in it, it's generally going to have higher BTU. With all that said, what's the point of all this? Aside from try to finish your videos before the sun gets too high above the trees and starts messing with your lighting. I was hoping by the end of the video I would come up with a point. I may have one. Let's see if this one works. When it comes to firewood BTU, there are several firewood BTU charts you can look up on the internet. But don't expect them to be 100% accurate. Some might even have some inconsistencies in them. But how much of that really matters? When you're looking up the number of BTU in a cord of firewood, how accurate do you need those figures to be? For a product that is generally known for its inconsistency. We're dealing with firewood here. We're not landing rovers on the Mars. Rovers on the Mars. We're not landing rovers. This is not fine rocketry we're working with here. Do you really need to be more accurate than just noticing one of these has more density than the other? It probably has more heat available than the other one does. With a lot of the things we talked about in this video, I think we're just splitting hairs. Density is the major thing, but little things like one has more ash content than the other, I don't think that's such a big deal as far as BTU. It's more a matter of, do you really want wood where you're going to have to be cleaning out your burning appliance because the ash keeps building up? I think that's more of a significant factor than you're going to have a little less BTU in the wood because of the ash. The bark, unless it's just really barky stuff, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference on a cord of wood. What might make a bigger difference is how straight are the pieces? How tightly do those pieces fit together to make that cord of wood? If you have a bunch of crooked, wonky pieces, you're going to have a lot of airspace in that cord. That's going to make a much bigger difference than how much ash content it has, whether it has more resins or not. We got to focus on things that actually matter, not things that are just splitting hairs. Was that good enough to be the point of the video? Works for me.